We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and...
Prince William had entered the private Windsor sitting room, expecting a difficult family discussion. He did not expect Princess Anne to place Queen Elizabeth's sealed final memorandum before him. He did not expect Catherine's name to appear beside a command affecting the future of the crown. And he certainly did not expect Camilla's position to be addressed so directly. When Anne finally read the Queen's last wish aloud, William lowered his head, covered his face, and broke down. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne had summoned William, Catherine, King Charles, and Camilla to Windsor Castle, with no aides allowed inside. She carried a blue case marked with Elizabeth's personal cipher and placed it at the table's center. A royal cipher is the monarch's unique emblem. One sentence could fracture both family and crown. Anne opened the case and explained that it held a private memorandum dictated in the late Queen's final months. A memorandum is a written record of instructions for future decisions. Elizabeth had ordered her daughter to keep it sealed until tension between the King's household, the Prince of Wales, and the Queen Consort threatened the monarchy. Then she read the command. Catherine must become the principal female guide and guardian of royal continuity, while Camilla must step back from decisions involving her role, William's reign, and the upbringing of George, Charlotte, and Louis. William gripped the chair. His grandmother had trusted Catherine as the woman who would preserve the crown's values after her death. He tried to remain still, but grief collided with responsibility. Catherine reached for him. He turned away, ashamed of losing control, until Anne revealed a sentence preserved in the documented account. Elizabeth had called him the heir who carries too much in silence. Camilla asked whether Charles had known. The king removed his glasses and admitted that he knew his mother had left instructions, but not that his wife's authority would be restricted. Anne clarified that the wish was not punishment, it was protection. Elizabeth feared rival centers of influence would isolate Catherine, weaken William, and turn the next reign into a private battle for control. Camilla pushed back her chair and demanded to know what she had done. Anne closed the memorandum and answered that the reason lay inside one private incident the family had buried. As William struggled to absorb the burden his grandmother had placed upon Catherine, every gaze shifted toward Camilla. Because before Anne could reveal the incident that changed everything, the people inside that room had to confront what each of them stood to lose. The Queen's final wish did not simply divide responsibilities. It exposed 4 private fears that had remained hidden behind ceremony. William feared failing the grandmother who had prepared him for the throne. Catherine feared becoming the cause of a family rupture. Charles feared being forced to choose between his mother's judgment and his wife's dignity. And Camilla, sitting across from them in stunned silence, feared that history had already decided how she would be remembered. William remained near the window, but his thoughts returned to the years when Queen Elizabeth had taught him how grief and duty could survive together. She had guided him after Diana's death, and warned that a future sovereign must protect the family as carefully as the institution. A sovereign is the reigning monarch, the person carrying the crown's formal authority. Yet Elizabeth believed authority meant little if private wounds were allowed to poison public service. Catherine watched him struggle and understood why the memorandum cut so deeply. The Queen had seen her endure scrutiny, raise George, Charlotte, and Louis under extraordinary pressure, and resist every attempt to pull her into palace rivalry. William admitted that he felt proud of her and terrified for her at once. The document recognized her strength, but it also placed a target on her back. She answered quietly that she had never wanted authority gained through another woman's humiliation. Camilla stayed seated when Charles rose. She rubbed one thumb against her wedding ring and told him she had spent years proving she could serve the crown without threatening it. The Queen Consort, meaning the wife of a reigning king, had expected judgment from the public, but not a final restriction from the monarch whose acceptance she had fought to earn. Her sadness hardened when the king could not promise that he would reject the instruction. Charles turned toward Anne and asked why his mother had never spoken to him directly. She answered from Elizabeth's documented memorandum that the late queen feared he would hear the warning as a husband before hearing it as a sovereign. The words wounded him because he could not deny their truth. Anne then revealed that Catherine's role reached far beyond ceremony. The memorandum gave her moral authority over family unity, future royal households, the children's preparation for service, and traditions that could never become weapons in a personal struggle. William asked for the separate handwritten note Elizabeth had left him, but Anne refused. He could read it only after learning what had forced the Queen to act. Catherine noticed Camilla's expression change at the mention of the children. That single reaction pointed toward Charlotte, a forgotten ceremonial dispute, and the moment Elizabeth decided silence was no longer safe. The meeting was no longer about titles or precedents. It was about wounds each person had carried into the room. And the deepest wound began on a day when one seemingly minor decision involving Charlotte pushed the Queen beyond the point of silence. For months, the disagreement had been dismissed as a harmless clash over protocol. It began with a seating plan, a young princess, and an instruction issued without Catherine's knowledge. Yet Queen Elizabeth saw something more dangerous beneath it, an attempt to shape the next generation through authority that had never been granted. The moment lasted only minutes, but it became the point of no return, and the hidden reason Anne was now reading the Queen's final wish. The tension began during preparations for a private Commonwealth service at St. George's Chapel. A Commonwealth service is a formal royal gathering honoring the nations connected through the Commonwealth. Senior family members were expected to attend, and Princess Charlotte had been given a symbolic place beside Catherine to represent continuity between the present monarchy and the generation that would one day follow it. Catherine had prepared her daughter carefully. She explained the seriousness of the occasion and promised that she would remain close throughout the ceremony. William supported that arrangement because it allowed Charlotte to experience duty without being turned into a symbol she was too young to understand. For both parents, the placement protected their child while introducing her gently to royal responsibility. Camilla changed everything only hours before the service. She privately instructed staff to move Charlotte beside her, arguing that the Queen Consort should visibly connect the current reign to the future. Catherine discovered the alteration during the final rehearsal, when the young princess became distressed and asked why she had been moved away from her mother. Catherine confronted Camilla in a private corridor and demanded to know why neither parent had been consulted. The Queen Consort answered that the monarchy could not be organized around maternal comfort. Catherine kept her voice controlled, but her reply carried unmistakable anger. Charlotte was a child, not ceremonial property to be repositioned for political effect. William arrived moments later and found his daughter holding Catherine's hand, close to tears. The prince cancelled Charlotte's participation rather than force her into the revised arrangement. Camilla treated the decision as a rejection of her authority, and the argument continued behind a closed vestry door. A vestry is a private church room used by clergy and officials before a service. Elizabeth had overheard enough. The monarch remained silent during the ceremony, but afterward requested both seating plans and ordered Anne, through a documented instruction, to gather every message showing who had authorized the change. Anne told the Windsor room that the records exposed a pattern. Catherine's family decisions had repeatedly been recast as disputes over hierarchy, leaving William's household vulnerable and the children caught inside an adult struggle for influence. Camilla denied that Elizabeth had ever confronted her. Anne looked directly at her and produced the Queen's written account of that meeting, including the warning she had refused to accept. The ceremony had supplied the trigger, but the Queen's private confrontation supplied the verdict, and as Anne prepared to reveal what was said, Camilla rose from her chair and demanded the right to answer Catherine face to face. Camilla did not deny changing Charlotte's position. She denied that the decision proved she was dangerous. Standing across from Catherine with the Queen's memorandum between them, she accused the future Queen of allowing William's grief to turn a disagreement into a judgment against her entire life. Catherine listened without interruption. Then she delivered one sentence that silenced the room. "You were warned that my children were not yours to position." Camilla argued that the ceremony had been planned during a period of deep uncertainty, when the new reign still needed visible signs of unity. She believed placing Charlotte beside the queen consort would connect the present monarchy to its future. To her, it had been strategy, not cruelty. The title queen consort means the wife of the reigning king, a position carrying influence but no independent sovereign power. Yet Catherine answered that the problem had never been where her daughter stood. The problem was that both parents had been bypassed. Catherine held her ground and said authority without trust created obedience in public, but resentment in private. Camilla stepped closer and asked whether she truly believed Elizabeth wanted her pushed aside. The future queen rose without retreating. She said the late monarch had wanted boundaries, not revenge. Camilla placed one hand against the table and accused her of benefiting from a dead woman's judgment that could no longer be challenged. William stood so quickly that Charles ordered him to sit. The prince refused. He warned Camilla not to speak as though his grandmother's death had made her wisdom irrelevant, but his voice broke before the sentence ended. Years of grief and buried anger suddenly pressed into the same moment. The king turned toward his son and asked whether he believed his wife had deliberately harmed Charlotte. William answered with painful control. He did not claim that Camilla had intended to frighten the child. He said the harm came from treating Charlotte's fear as less important than the image the palace wanted to create. Charles absorbed the words in silence, realizing that careless power could wound even when cruelty had never been the goal. Anne opened Elizabeth's documented account of her private meeting with Camilla. The written record stated that any attempt to control William's household would weaken Charles's reign. The Queen had instructed her to advise the sovereign, not compete with the woman destined to stand beside the next monarch. Camilla finally admitted the meeting had occurred, but insisted the warning had been spoken in anger. Anne then produced a notation added weeks later. "My concern remains. Catherine must be protected from interference disguised as precedence." Precedence means the formal order deciding who stands before whom in royal life, but Elizabeth believed it had been used as a weapon. Charles asked whether the memorandum carried constitutional force. Anne answered that it was not law, yet the Queen had made it almost impossible to ignore. By placing its enforcement in hands the family could not easily overrule. The confrontation exposed every grievance, but emotion alone would not decide what happened next. Because Elizabeth had entrusted the power behind her final wish to the one royal prepared to enforce it against husband, king, or future king alike. Princess Anne had spent decades avoiding the appearance of ambition. That was precisely why the Queen trusted her with authority capable of changing the family's internal balance. Elizabeth knew William might hesitate out of grief, Catherine might retreat to avoid conflict, Charles might compromise to protect Camilla, and Camilla might fight to preserve her standing. Anne, however, would do something none of them could guarantee: carry out the instruction exactly as it had been given. Anne explained that her mother had named her custodian of the memorandum and personal executor of its family provisions. A custodian is the person trusted to protect and administer something important, while an executor carries out the instructions left behind. Her role was not to seize power from Charles. It was to confirm which responsibilities Elizabeth intended Catherine to inherit, and prevent those duties from being weakened by rival household orders. The Queen had chosen Anne because she had no claim to the future throne, no separate court to build, and no appetite for ceremonial dominance. She stood outside the struggle between the current reign and the next. That distance mattered. Elizabeth believed only someone without personal ambition could enforce boundaries without making them look like weapons. Anne's control slipped when she described her mother's final days. She recalled Elizabeth asking whether William was ready, whether Catherine remained steady, and whether Charles understood how quickly private family wounds could become constitutional damage. That phrase meant harm serious enough to weaken the monarchy's public stability. Anne folded the note, paused, and continued in a quieter voice. Charles looked wounded. He asked whether his mother had believed him too weak to manage his own household. Anne answered that Elizabeth had never doubted his love. She had doubted love's ability to remain impartial when the person being protected was Camilla. The king said nothing, because the distinction struck too close to the truth. Camilla turned on Anne and asked whether resentment had shaped the entire decision. The princess refused the provocation. She moved the document toward Charles and pointed to Elizabeth's signature, making clear that she was not acting as a rival, but as the monarch's chosen witness. Anne then revealed the practical measures. Catherine would receive independent briefings on family continuity, direct access to records concerning the younger heirs, and final consultation on ceremonial roles involving her children. Camilla's household could advise, but it could not alter those decisions without written approval. William discovered that Elizabeth had anticipated resistance. Her handwritten instruction declared that Catherine's guidance must never be reduced to symbolic honor. It had to carry real influence over royal upbringing, family unity, and the character of the next reign. Charles faced one choice: accept the framework voluntarily, or allow Anne to distribute authenticated copies to senior household officials. He asked for one night. Camilla left before he finished, while Catherine watched the king realize that delay had already begun creating consequences. Anne possessed the authority, but Charles still possessed the crown. And during the night that followed, every corridor at Windsor seemed to wait for his decision, while Camilla confronted the terrifying possibility that the monarchy had already begun moving around her. The fallout did not begin with a proclamation. It began with a closed door. Camilla returned to her private rooms expecting Charles to follow, but minutes passed and he did not come. Across the castle, William remained with Anne, Catherine sat alone with the Queen's memorandum, and Charles faced a decision capable of wounding his wife or defying his mother's final command. Before midnight, one quiet administrative order confirmed that the old balance had already ended. Charles met privately with his principal advisor and asked how the memorandum could be honored without publicly humiliating Camilla. The advisor explained that the changes could remain inside the royal households, meaning the separate teams that manage each senior royal's duties and decisions. But delay carried danger. Competing instructions could create another clash involving the Wales children, and this time, the damage might escape the palace. William refused to treat the moment as a victory. He told Anne that Catherine's new authority must never look as though it had been won through Camilla's defeat. The princess answered that the difference would depend on what he did next. He could use Elizabeth's wish to settle old scores, or he could use firm boundaries to create the peace his grandmother had wanted. Camilla received a revised briefing folder shortly before midnight. A briefing folder is a collection of official papers prepared for royal decisions and engagements. One section that had previously required her approval now carried the words, "Consultation, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales." She read the line twice, closed the folder, and reached for the call button summoning her secretary. Then she slowly withdrew her hand. Charles finally entered and found his wife waiting in near silence. Camilla asked whether he had accepted the memorandum. The king replied that he had accepted his mother's concern. She told him there was no meaningful difference, because accepting that concern meant believing she had become the danger Elizabeth feared. Charles tried to reassure her that she remained his wife and queen. Camilla asked whether she still remained his partner in shaping the monarchy. His hesitation answered before his words could. She turned away, fighting tears, and said a title without trust could become another kind of prison. Catherine received a sealed schedule transferring 3 decisions involving George, Charlotte, and Louis into her direct consultation. One concerned Charlotte's first independent ceremonial appearance, the very issue that had started the conflict. Yet she did not approve it immediately. Instead, she returned the document with one handwritten condition: Camilla must not be publicly embarrassed or suddenly excluded. William read Catherine's words, and finally understood why Elizabeth had trusted her. Still shaken, he left Anne and went to find Camilla alone. The machinery of the palace had delivered its first verdict, but the true turning point would not come from an altered briefing folder. It would come when William knocked on Camilla's door and asked to speak not as an heir, but as a wounded grandson. William entered Camilla's room, carrying no memorandum and no royal authority. His eyes were still red, his voice remained unsteady, and for several seconds neither of them spoke. Camilla expected accusation. William expected resistance. Instead, he placed the Queen's handwritten note on the table and admitted that he was frightened. Not of Camilla losing influence, but of grief turning the family into enemies his grandmother would no longer recognize. William explained that Elizabeth's final wish did not erase Charles's reign or Camilla's place beside him. It drew a boundary around Catherine and the children because the future monarchy needed one secure center of emotional continuity. Emotional continuity meant a stable source of trust, guidance, and family values across one reign into the next. Without that center, competing claims to influence could turn private tension into permanent division. Camilla answered that she had never considered herself Catherine's rival. She believed her experience gave her a duty to prevent mistakes and protect Charles from being overtaken by the growing strength of the Wales household. William listened, then told her that protection became control whenever Catherine's judgment was treated as secondary. Camilla finally admitted what no formal meeting had drawn from her. With no aides present, and no documented statement to hide behind, she confessed that Catherine's effortless public acceptance had awakened an old fear. She would always be the woman history merely tolerated, while another princess was embraced without condition. The decision involving Charlotte, she said, had come from insecurity disguised as duty. William lowered his voice and acknowledged his own failure. He had seen the tension growing, but avoided confronting Camilla because doing so might wound his father. That silence left Catherine absorbing pressure alone and allowed resentment to harden until Elizabeth was forced to intervene. For the first time, the future king apologized for waiting too long. Camilla asked whether Catherine hated her. William answered that the first instruction she had written after receiving new authority was a demand that Camilla not be humiliated. The queen consort covered her mouth briefly and admitted she had prepared herself for triumph, punishment, and public defeat, but not mercy. William offered her Elizabeth's private note, despite Anne's instruction that he should read it first. Camilla refused, saying some words belonged to the monarch's grandson alone. He opened it and found one final request. Do not inherit our silences. Speak before love becomes resentment. William decided he would uphold the Queen's wish within the family, but Catherine and Camilla would communicate directly without intermediaries. Camilla agreed to withdraw from decisions involving the Wales children and accept Catherine's leadership without demanding compensation. Charles signed the internal directive at dawn. Yet one altered palace notice soon reached the press. Inside Windsor, William's honesty had transformed a verdict into the beginning of reconciliation. But outside the gates, one line on an official notice was about to ignite headlines, crowds, and a public reckoning over Catherine and Camilla's place in royal history. By 9 o'clock, the private decision had become a national event. A palace notice confirming Catherine's new responsibility for family continuity and the preparation of the next generation appeared without explanation. Within minutes, broadcasters interrupted scheduled programming, newspaper editors tore up their front pages, and crowds began forming outside Buckingham Palace. The public did not know every word of the Queen's memorandum, but they immediately understood that power had shifted, and that Camilla had been asked to step back. Buckingham Palace issued a measured statement describing the change as an internal clarification of responsibilities, supported by Charles, William, and senior members of the family. An internal clarification is an official adjustment explaining who controls particular duties without changing the legal line of succession. The wording avoided any mention of conflict, yet Catherine's new authority was impossible to miss. Catherine ordered palace staff not to brief against Camilla. She also insisted that the statement reaffirm her respect for the king and his wife. William supported that restraint because he understood how quickly Elizabeth's final wish could be twisted into a public spectacle of winners and losers. For him, protecting the meaning of the decision mattered as much as enforcing it. The first major front page appeared before noon. A London newspaper placed Catherine beside Queen Elizabeth beneath the headline, "Her Final Trust." Below them, a smaller photograph showed William leaving Windsor with grief still visible on his face. Someone raised the paper above the crowd outside Buckingham Palace, and applause spread through the gathered onlookers. A veteran royal broadcaster gave the moment its defining phrase during a live afternoon program. He called it, "The late Queen's final act of succession planning. Not of crowns, but of character." Succession planning means preparing the people and responsibilities that will carry the monarchy into its next reign. Radio bulletins repeated the sentence until it became larger than the palace statement itself. Public sympathy divided. Many saw Catherine's elevation as recognition of years of discipline, restraint, and loyalty. Others felt uneasy at Camilla's visible reduction, arguing that no one should be judged through instructions they could not answer publicly. The debate grew fierce, but Catherine's refusal to celebrate prevented it from becoming an open campaign of cruelty. Camilla watched the coverage beside Charles. When the newspaper image appeared, she admitted that Elizabeth had always understood symbols better than anyone. The king reached for her hand, but she kept watching Catherine and said resistance would now prove the Queen's warning correct. Catherine later attended a scheduled engagement and offered only one sentence: "Service to the next generation must be built on stability, kindness, and shared duty." Her restraint deepened public respect. That evening, the family returned to Windsor to hear William's final decision. This time, he stood without breaking. The world had chosen to see Elizabeth's wish as a transfer of trust, but the monarchy still needed its own final meaning. And when William stood before Catherine, Camilla, Charles, and Anne that evening, grief finally gave way to a decision none of them could misunderstand. William returned to the same room where he had broken down, but he was no longer hiding his grief. The Queen's memorandum rested before him, Catherine stood at his side, and Camilla faced him without defensiveness. What began as a revelation capable of dividing the family had become a test of whether they could choose duty without cruelty. William's final words did not erase the pain. They gave it purpose, and transformed Elizabeth's last wish into the foundation of a new royal peace. William formally accepted his grandmother's judgment that Catherine must become the principal guardian of continuity for the future reign. Guardian of continuity meant the person trusted to protect the family's values, prepare the younger generation, and preserve stability as one reign gave way to another. Her authority would cover the upbringing of George, Charlotte, and Louis, the character of their future household, and the emotional unity of the family itself. The prince made clear that this was not a ceremonial honor. It was a living responsibility. Charles confirmed the internal directive and admitted that Elizabeth's final wish did not weaken his sovereignty. Sovereignty is the legal authority held by the reigning monarch. Instead, the instruction prevented the present reign from interfering with the careful preparation of the next one. The king acknowledged that clearer boundaries should have been created before private tension became personal pain. William turned toward Anne and thanked her for carrying a duty that guaranteed anger from people she loved. The princess answered that loyalty to the queen had never meant choosing one relative against another. It meant forcing the family to confront what silence, fear, and avoidance had allowed to grow. Catherine then addressed Camilla directly. She promised that the late monarch's wish would never be used to strip her of dignity. The queen consort accepted Catherine's leadership and apologized for overriding her as Charlotte's mother. No excuses followed. Catherine accepted the apology without pretending the wound had vanished. Camilla removed the revised Charlotte schedule, signed beneath Catherine's authority, and passed the pen across the table. Catherine added her signature beside hers. That shared document became the first decision made under the new arrangement, and the clearest proof that boundaries could exist without revenge. William opened Elizabeth's handwritten note and read its final sentence aloud. The crown's strength, she had written, would depend not on which woman appeared most powerful, but on whether its women refused to destroy one another for proximity to power. William's breakdown was no longer seen as weakness. It was the moment he stopped carrying grief alone. Catherine became the trusted moral center of the future monarchy. Camilla retained dignity while accepting necessary limits. Charles chose stability over avoidance, and Anne completed her mother's final duty. There would be no further battle over Elizabeth's final instruction. Her decision had been heard, accepted, and transformed into a family promise. Catherine would guide the monarchy's future, Camilla would respect its boundaries, and William would never again allow silence to endanger the people, or the crown, entrusted to him. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.